On June the 26th, 1963, US President John F. Kennedy stood on the steps of the Rathaus Schönenberg in West Berlin and delivered one of the most famous and infamous speeches of his presidency. Before a gathered crowd of 450,000 people, Kennedy rallied against East Germany's construction of the Berlin Wall 2 months before, extolled the virtues of democracy and self-government, and pledged his unwavering support for the people of West Berlin, stating, "I know of no town, no city that has been besieged for 18 years that still lives with the vitality and the force and the hope and the determination of the city of West Berlin. Lasting peace in Europe can never be assured as long as 1 German out of 4 is denied the elementary right of free men, and that is to make a free choice. You live in a defended island of freedom, but your life is part of the main. Freedom is indivisible, and when one man is enslaved, all are not free." Then, in a final powerful statement of solidarity, he closed his speech with the iconic words, "All free men, wherever they may live, are citizens of Berlin, and therefore, as a free man, I take pride in the words, Ich bin ein Berliner." If you have ever heard of this speech, then you probably know what happened next. Instead of cheering, the crowd broke into mocking laughter. Thanks to an unfortunate combination of bad grammar and cultural ignorance, the president had just declared himself to be not a fellow resident of Berlin, but rather a Berliner, a type of jelly-filled donut. So, whoopsie doodle. Only, no, he didn't. While this story has been repeated countless times over the past 6 decades and become a popular and quirky bit of JFK lore, there is little evidence that any German listening to Kennedy's speech that day would have understood his final words as meaning, "I am a jelly donut." So how then did this amusing, if ultimately false, urban legend get started? Well, it's all got to do with the intricacies of German grammar, lazy journalism, and our age-old tendency to not let the truth get in the way of a good story. This is the story of one of the most misunderstood speeches of the Cold War. Kennedy's Ich bin ein Berliner speech had its origins in one of the pivotal events of the Cold War. Following the surrender of Nazi Germany on May 9, 1945, the country was divided into 4 zones of occupation, each administered by a different Allied power: Great Britain, the United States, France, and the Soviet Union. The capital city of Berlin was similarly divided, though it lay deep within the Soviet zone of occupation. Before long, however, relations between the former allies began to sour as the Iron Curtain fell across Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union and Western allies began jockeying for control of the newly liberated continent. In an attempt to gain complete control of the capital, in June 1948, the Soviets blockaded the roads leading into Berlin, cutting off the city from West Germany. In response, the Western allies launched the Berlin Airlift, flying more than 2.3 million tons of food, coal, and other supplies into the city over the course of 11 months. Finally, in May 1949, the Soviets capitulated and reopened the roads, turning Berlin into a fragile but strategically vital Western enclave in the heart of East Germany, a place infamous for espionage and intrigue. It was also one of the only places along the 7,000-kilometer border between Eastern and Western blocs that could be freely crossed, and between 1946 and 1961, it was the point of entry for nearly 3.5 million Germans fleeing the communist German Democratic Republic for a better life in the West. This mass exodus resulted in a significant brain drain and shortage of skilled labor within the GDR, which then leader Walter Ulbricht was determined to put an end to. And so it was that at midnight on Sunday, August the 12th, 1961, thousands of East German troops sprang into action along the Berlin border, tearing up roads, demolishing buildings, and stringing barbed wire fences. Later that morning, the sun rose over a divided city. The border between East and West was officially closed. Over the years, this temporary obstacle would evolve into a formidable 140-kilometer-long barrier incorporating 4-meter-high concrete walls, metal fences, barbed wire, anti-vehicle trenches and spike strips, guard towers, and a 100-meter-wide zone of death. Known in East Germany as the Antifaschistische Schutzwall, or anti-fascist rampart, and elsewhere simply as the Berlin Wall, according to official government statements, the barrier was intended to keep Western spies and saboteurs from crossing the border into East Germany. In reality, however, the wall served a single purpose: to prevent East German citizens from fleeing to the West, a practice that colloquially became known as Republikflucht, or a Republic flight. Nonetheless, many still tried, with thousands succeeding and around 100 dying in the attempt during the wall's 28-year history. It was against this backdrop that President Kennedy made his official visit to Berlin in 1963. The United States had been criticized for not responding forcefully enough to the construction of the Berlin Wall, and Kennedy wished to assure the people of West Berlin that he would defend their city against East German and Soviet aggression. Kennedy based his speech on a previous address that he'd given at a civic reception in New Orleans on May 4th, 1963, in which he stated, 2,000 years ago, the proudest boast was to say, I am a citizen of Rome. Today, I believe in 1962, the proudest boast is to say, I am a citizen of the United States. And it is not enough to merely say it, we must live it. Anyone can say it, but Americans who serve today in West Berlin, your sons and brothers, are the Americans who are bearing the great burden. For his Berlin visit, Kennedy changed I am a citizen of the United States to I am a Berliner, though for additional impact he insisted on delivering this statement, as well as several others, in German. To this end, he sought the assistance of Ted Sorensen, his speechwriter, Margaret Plicht, a translator working for the State Department, and Robert Lochner, his official German interpreter, who translated several passages of Kennedy's speech into German and provided phonetic transcriptions for the president to practice. After it became apparent that Kennedy did not have a knack for languages, to avoid potential embarrassment, the number of German phrases in the speech was cut down to just two: Ich bin ein Berliner and Lass sie nach Berlin kommen, or let them come to Berlin, which Kennedy used as a defiant challenge to the Soviets, saying, there are many people in the world who really don't understand or say they don't what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin. There are some who say that communism is the wave of the future. Let them come to Berlin. And there are some who say in Europe and elsewhere, we can work with the communists. Let them come to Berlin. And there are even a few who say that it is true that communism is an evil system, but it permits us to make economic progress. Lass sie nach Berlin kommen. Let them come to Berlin. According to Margaret Plischke, in the days leading up to his Berlin visit, Kennedy agonized over the grammar and pronunciation of the German phrases, endlessly practicing the passages in front of her, Robert Lochner, and even West Berlin Mayor Willy Brandt, and writing down the phonetic pronunciation on his cue cards. But if Kennedy's speech was so heavily vetted by expert German speakers, how could the president have made such a colossal blunder? Well, according to believers of the jelly donut myth, the issue lies in the inclusion of the indefinite article ein. Originally, a person from Berlin would omit this article and simply say, Ich bin Berliner. Adding the ein, the argument goes, turns the term Berliner from an abstract to a definite object. In other words, a donut. However, while Ich bin Berliner is indeed the most common and literal form of the phrase, both it and Ich bin ein Berliner are equally correct, just as I am American and I am an American are equivalent, though the ein is usually left in when speaking figuratively. Indeed, Kennedy was aware of this distinction and deliberately added the ein to distinguish himself as a figurative resident of the city, as opposed to someone actually born there. As Margaret Plischke later recalls, the interpreter scheduled to accompany President Kennedy on the trip, Heinz Weber, was there in the office. He was a rather unpleasant man who complained bitterly that he had to interrupt his vacation just to watch the president's mannerisms. Right then and there, he rendered the president's words into German, translating the definite article, a, into ein, even though most Germans would say Ich bin Berliner. When I pointed out this minor difference in usage, the president seemed a little startled. He must have discussed it with Mrs. Kennedy, because the next day he said he wanted to leave the ein in the text. This was later criticized by the people who did not like the speech or the president or his trip to Berlin. I had told the president it was all right, because I remembered an old Prussian song written in 1831 by Bernhard Thursch, Ich bin ein Prusser, kennt ich mein Farben. I am Prussian, know ye my colors. No German would have thought that it was wrong. Another problem with the jelly donut story is that the pastry commonly known as Berliner is not known by that name in the city of Berlin. Originally known as a Pfannkuchen or Krapfen, the pastry was originally invented in Berlin in the 16th century and quickly spread throughout Germany, where it became known as a Berliner Pfannkuchen or simply a Berliner. In Berlin itself, however, the Pfannkuchen retained its original name, meaning that few Berlin residents would have been aware of its regional nickname. But the greatest flaw of the jelly donut myth is the context in which Kennedy's speech was delivered. Given the contents and tone of the rest of the speech, his meaning would have been crystal clear to all in attendance. No reasonable Berliner would have interpreted Ich bin ein Berliner as I am a jelly donut, any more than a resident of Hamburg would have mistaken Ich bin ein Hamburger for I am a grilled ground beef sandwich. So, why then did the crowd laugh at Kennedy's speech? Well, this was actually intentional and came not after the final, more famous recitation of Ich bin ein Berliner, but rather an earlier instance in which Kennedy, adapting his New Orleans speech, stated, 2,000 years ago, the proudest boast was civis Romanus sum. Today, in the world of freedom, the proudest boast is Ich bin ein Berliner. Following this line, Kennedy immediately quipped, "I appreciate my interpreter translating my German." This elicited a good-natured laugh from the crowd. Indeed, what concerned and embarrassed Kennedy's retinue and his West German hosts was not the president's alleged identification as a confectionery, but the aggressive tone of the speech itself. As originally written, Kennedy's speech was far more conciliatory towards the Soviets, suggesting that cooperation and understanding between the superpowers might be possible. However, upon seeing the Berlin Wall and the plight of the citizens of East Berlin, Kennedy hardened his stance and decided to go off script, much to the annoyance of National Security Advisor McGeorge Bundy and Kennedy's translator Heinz Weber, who later said, "He says more than he should, something different from what his advisors had recommended, and is more provocative than he had intended to be." Consequently, Kennedy's next address given at the Free University Berlin took a softer stance, prompting Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev to comment, "One would think the two speeches were made by two different presidents." Nevertheless, the Ich bin ein Berliner speech had the desired effect, doing much to cement the United States' status as the defender of Western Germany. It would go down as one of John F. Kennedy's finest speeches and a highlight of his presidency. So, if you in the audience that day could have misinterpreted Kennedy's words, then where did the "I am a jelly donut" myth come from? As far as historians can tell, the myth originated in Len Deighton's 1983 spy novel Berlin Game, in which protagonist Bernard Sampson states, "Ich bin ein Berliner, I said." It was a joke. A Berliner is a donut. The day after President Kennedy made his famous proclamation, Berlin cartoonists had a field day with talking donuts. Despite the fact that Sampson is an unreliable narrator, the New York Times' review of Berlin Game took the passage at face value, and an urban myth was born. 4 years later, the story appeared in a New York Times op-ed, further cementing it in the public consciousness. It has been reported over and over ever since, earning its place in the pantheon of fun historical facts everyone thinks they know. But, as always, you can't believe everything you read on the internet, present company excluded, of course. Now, excuse me while I go and get a delicious donut. No, but first, a bonus fact. John F. Kennedy was not the first or only Cold War leader to have his words lost in translation. On November the 18th, 1956, at a reception at the Polish embassy in Moscow, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev addressed a group of Western ambassadors with the following words. "About the capitalist states, it doesn't depend on whether or not we exist. If you don't like us, don't accept our invitations, and don't invite us to come see you. Whether you like it or not, history is on our side. We will bury you." Khrushchev's final words disturbed the assembled delegates, around a dozen of whom proceeded to promptly leave the room. In the West, the speech was widely interpreted as an open threat of nuclear war, prompting Los Angeles Mayor Norris Paulson to rebut the Soviet premier in 1959, stating, "We do not agree with your widely quoted phrase. We shall bury you. You shall not bury us, and we shall not bury you. We are happy with our way of life. We recognize its shortcomings and are always trying to improve it, but if challenged, we shall fight to the death to preserve it." However, many Russian speakers have since pointed out that the idiom used by Khrushchev, "Mi vas pokhorenim," was poorly translated by his personal interpreter, Viktor Sukharev. More correctly translated, it's not "we will kill you all," but rather "we will outlast you all." The phrase likely derives from the old Marxist saying, "The bourgeoisie is the undertaker of capitalism." Indeed, in a speech given in Yugoslavia on August 24th, 1963, Khrushchev himself clarified his intent. "I once said, 'We will bury you,' and I got into trouble with it. Of course, we will not bury you with a shovel. Your own working class will bury you." It would not be the last time that Khrushchev's fiery rhetoric and colourful idioms would baffle Western translators and inflame Cold War tensions. On several occasions, Khrushchev used the phrase, "We shall show you Kuzma's mother," as a Russian idiom roughly meaning to severely punish someone. Due to its ominous connotations, the phrase soon became a popular diplomatic euphemism for the atomic bomb. Indeed, the 50-megaton Tsar bomber, the largest nuclear weapon ever detonated, was nicknamed Kuzma's mother by its designers. Then there is the infamous shoe-banging incident during a meeting of the United Nations General Assembly on October 12, 1960. Lorenzo Sumalong, the head of the Filipino delegation, gave a speech denouncing the annexation and subjugation of Eastern European states by the Soviet Union. Enraged, Khrushchev rose from his seat, removed his shoe, and proceeded to bang it on the table before pushing his way to the rostrum and launching into his own angry denunciation of Sumalong. He was soon joined by Romanian Foreign Vice Minister Eduard Mezenensu, the whole outburst finally being brought to an end by UN Assembly President Frederick Boland, who banged his gavel so hard that it actually broke. The incident was an embarrassment for the Soviet Union and a bridge too far for Khrushchev's supporters in the Politburo, contributing to his eventual removal as first secretary of the Communist Party in 1964.